My focus is kind of unusual in creation circles. My focus is on human evolution. Did humans evolve? And it seems like most of the in fact, I don't know anybody out there now that's working on human evolution. And I'm looking at not only human evolution relative to the fossil record, but I'm looking at the evidence for the evolution of the heart, the lungs, the kidneys. I just did an article on the evolution of the tongue. And without a tongue, you couldn't swallow your food. Tongues are critical. Organisms either have a tongue or they don't. And evolutionists have no idea how the tongue evolved. We just know some organisms have it, and, well, fish don't have it. They take in materials, liquids primarily, in their mouth very different ways. And so that's my focus. And I don't know why there's not more people interested. Dr. Metten was, but he is no longer with us, and so therefore kind of leaves me. So anyways, that's my focus. And one book we just finished, Apes as Ancestors, is the only book ever published which carefully documents the claim that none of these so-called missing links are valid. And how we did that was we looked at the literature, paleontological literature, showing indeed that certain claim by Leakey, for example, his claim was put out there and fellow paleontologists refuted it. And it turns out that all of the claims have been refuted by other paleontologists. In essence, I like my theory. I think mine is right. I don't like his theory, so I prove his theory wrong. He doesn't like my theory, so he tries to prove my theory wrong, but I still hold to it. Okay? And I think his criticism is not valid. Or I think, yeah, mine has problems, but his has more problems. And that's what we did. And you'll notice that there are hundreds of references, all from the, or 90% from the paleontological literature. So it's kind of deep, but we've had really good feedback. I gave it to I asked my barber if she would trade a book for a couple of haircuts. Why not? You might as well try. So she said, sure, no problem. And a month later, I came back for another haircut, and I kind of, not nicely, said, well, how you coming in my book? I thought she would say, well, I working on chapter 1, but I'm lost. She said, actually, I'm on chapter 5, and it's really interesting. Barber, no training in biology at all. And I said, how'd you do it? 3-4 pages every day, just carefully read it, think about it, and I hope to get through the whole book, which I imagine by now she has gone through the whole book. So this presentation is on human evolution, and this is an article from Christianity Today, and basically this is about a debate which is now occurring among those who teach theology. And I happened to be at Baylor University when this debate was occurring, and so therefore I got firsthand information about what it's all about. And basically, to make a long story short, they've concluded that evolution is proven, period. It's proven by science, end of story. Therefore, we have to deal with Adam and Eve, especially in spite of the fact that we accept science which says evolution has occurred, period. And they came up with various ways of dealing with Adam and Eve, and basically they said, well, it has to be symbolic. Symbolic? But if you believe evolution is factual, you have to then, if you want to hold to your theology, you have to come up with some explanation to deal with Adam and Eve. They mention things like, well, Adam and Eve are only mentioned like 6 times in the whole Bible, so therefore they're not very important. Well, and to me the problem is once you throw out Adam and Eve, you throw out original sin, and you throw out basically Christ's sacrifice, which negates, pays for original sin as well as our own sin, and therefore, to me, you've got a major theological problem. But from their standpoint, how do you deal with this problem? Since evolution is, obviously, they concluded, true. My conclusion is human evolution is not only not true, but there is overwhelming evidence against human evolution. And what can I do in an hour presentation? Just skim the surface. So that's what I will do. Okay, what difference does it make? Well, when surveys have been done on those who accept evolution as opposed to creation, we find that this is a chart which does a pretty good job. A survey that was done. And the longer this line here, the more they accept evolution. So ironically, most Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept evolution, they accept creation. A few do, but most don't. Mormons, a few more does, but most don't. Evangelical Protestants, a few does more than Mormons, but still, you can see a large number accept evolution. Historically, black Protestant, more acceptance of evolution. Muslim, which surprises me, since they have almost deified Adam. The Muslims consider Adam a prophet and talk about him extensively in their holy books. Mainline Protestant, the Methodists, Episcopalians, and so on. Again, you can see over half of the mainline Protestant people accept evolution as the explanation for the origin of man. And I happen to be a mainline Protestant. I was a Methodist pastor, and it is a major problem in the church. And our church just disaffiliated about a month ago, which basically means we are now no longer part of United Methodist denomination. And I understand something like 30,000 churches have left the Methodist denomination. The response of the Methodists has been, good riddance. Glad you're leaving. Good riddance. And the pastor was at the conference a couple weeks ago, and he said that is the general attitude, good riddance. You fundamentalists, he called us fundamentalists. We're not fundamentalists. You fundamentalists believe in a literal Adam and Eve, but that's not us. Okay, our pastor was somewhat discouraged. We're now part of the global Methodist Church, and so we'll see how things go. Orthodox, again, Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, a larger number accept evolution. Catholic, a large number. Unaffiliated, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist, all accept, with a few exceptions, the evolutionary explanation. So it's widely accepted. Now, what are the official positions? This is a chart, a study done of the official positions in writing. So we now know the denominations, like the Catholics, said literally in writing, we accept evolution as the explanation for the origin of humans. Okay, and United Methodist, right up there. Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, yes. Now, many Lutherans, the Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Synod, of course, do not go along with that, but the main line does. African Methodist Episcopal Church, yes. Presbyterian, yes. Episcopal, yes. Greek Orthodox, yes. United Church of Christ, yes. Basically, all the churches that are shrinking are yes. The ones that are growing are the no's. The no's basically do not accept evolution as the explanation for man. The result of this is a paper, local paper. I'm from Montpelier, which is nearby Bryan. And basically, less than half of all Americans now are members of houses of worship. They are leaving the churches in droves. And one reason is they really believe that the overwhelming evidence says humans evolved. The scriptures are very clear. This is the King James Version. I go to a lot of churches that want this to be used. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. Very clear. One can't, there's no way you can interpret this in any other way except we are all descendants of Adam and Eve. Unequivocal. And there are many other scriptures, but I could spend the next half an hour relating the scriptures, and I would never get to my presentation. So I'll give one more in the New Testament. And he hath made of one blood from one man all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth. There you go. There's Adam and Eve. Now, when you compare the two, and again, I can only give you a few examples. This is called external morphology. When we look at the external morphology of an ape and a human, gross differences, unequivocal. By the way, I used to have a female up here in a bathing suit, and several people said, nope. Okay. And one person said this, girls are sexy, men are not. Hey, that's what I was told. So I said, no, it doesn't matter. So I put a guy up there. So there we go. So we got a guy. And a profile you can see, obviously huge differences. We are bipedal, and apes are quadrupedal. They walk on all fours. Faces, huge difference. Young girl and an ape. Obviously, you're not going to confuse the two in even a dark alley. It's not going to happen. And some people, by the way, any feedback is fine. Several people said, wait a minute, that's not fair. This is a blonde, blue-eyed girl. Compare her with somebody more similar to an ape. So I says, okay, there you go. Dark hair, brown eyes, still no comparison. And then several people said, wait a minute, it's still not fair. You have to use an African American. So there we go, African American and an ape. Still a huge difference. I think he's smiling. He says, hey, this is silly. Or she, whatever it is. Now, some people look like, have ape traits, and I say macrophallic, that's a mistake. This is a microphallic. Microphallicism is where the brain does not develop, and that's not a rare condition, and you do have some having ape traits. But still, this is, even with this condition, still, it's obvious that this is a human. And here, another example. This is a microphallic person. Micro, small brain is what that refers to. And still, there's a big difference. So you can find people that look kind of like apes, but the resemblance is very superficial. The eyes, you can see in these eyes here. These are from a human, a girl. And you can see the whites of the eyes, and there are, I understand there's one exception, but I haven't been able to find it. But apes do not show the whites of the eyes, therefore you do not know what they're looking at. And when they draw pictures of our evolutionary ancestors, guess what? They tend to show whites of the eyes. It makes it look more human, and of course that's the idea. And I'll show you a few pictures in a minute. And the skulls, very different, human and chimpanzee. Great differences, okay, between the two. And their x-rays, even more differences. Very different design. Now, what evolutionists have to do is bridge these. Bridge the connection between this design and this design. And that's what they've been trying to do. Brain size, small brain for the ape, large brain for us. When you look at the numbers, you can see about 1,400 for humans and about 400 grams for the ape. Size is part of the difference. There are other differences, but size is certainly one of them. The ability to speak, humans are the only creatures ever that can speak like you and I. Now, birds can do a pretty good job imitating or mutating, actually, sounds, but we know it's a bird. They're not going to fool anybody. And we know that the noises they make are not made through the complex system of speech. Apes, primates, except humans, cannot talk because this area, the oral cavity, etc., is a very different design. And there's no way they can talk without drastic changes. And among the changes they need is a resonance cavity up here. The tongue is critically important, and the trachea over here, and the esophagus over here, and the vocal cords over here. And the vocal cords have to function as vocal cords and make the noises, and there has to be a difference here in space for the sound to be modified so that speech is produced. And a good example is infants. Why can't they talk? Well, they can't talk because even though a lot of these structures are there, the space here is not long enough to articulate words, and therefore most babies cannot talk until what, 2, 3 years of age? There's no way they can talk when they're really young because the design is not quite appropriate. So even minor changes can affect whether or not they talk. The bones are obviously very different, and you can see the ape bones here, human bones here. And generally, if you find a bone, if it's somewhat intact, you can see that they're an ape bone or a human bone. Now, a lot of what they find are small fragments. So then it's sometimes more difficult to differentiate the human from the ape bone. Nonetheless, though, the bone structure is very different, and if you have enough of the bone, it's easy to tell whether it came from an ape or a human. The jaw especially, there's a difference. Ape jaw, human jaw. The simian shelf here, you can see how narrow that is and how wide this is. And also you'll notice that the canines are very visible, and right there they are. Humans, though, do not have this type of canine design. So very different. When you look at the external morphology, hand here, a human hand, and a gorilla hand, clearly great difference. Feet, again, you have major differences. The only creatures with feet like this are human. All the others actually don't have 2 feet, they have 4 hands. And 4 hands is really useful if you want to climb trees. So they're designed to climb trees where humans are not. Some people do a pretty good job of climbing trees, but on the other hand, it takes a lot of upper body strength and a lot of talent to do that. And you can see the difference here. The hand, the thumb here, literally, it's a hand, even though that technically is a foot, and a human foot is very different. And quadrupedal, so because apes are quadrupedal, they have a very different hip design, leg design, arm design, etc., compared to humans. Very different. The skulls, of course, major difference, and the skulls are one of the main means that evolutionists try to prove human evolution. And I have some examples up here. Here's a gorilla, and over here we have a Cro-Magnon man. And the problem is, though, all of these really are close enough that they should be labeled human. The contrast between these and this one is enormous, even though some of these have traits which resemble a gorilla. Okay, this, you can see the heads are different, very ape-like here, obviously. The bodies, though, are very modern human bodies. Now, why in the world would they show Australopithecus afarensis with an ape head and a very human body? The reason is because in most cases, all they have is the skulls. They don't have anything else. Now, they have fragments, but there's not enough. And Lucy is one of the better examples of a missing link, which basically they found a number of the bones, but only 20%. And from those bones, they really cannot construct the body very accurately. So even in trying to construct missing links, they have a problem in doing so. But nonetheless, it's accepted. And this is an interesting picture because this is Cro-Magnon. This used to be a major proof of human evolution in the textbooks as such, and guess what? And this is why I'm using this picture. It could be you. Cro-Magnon skulls look just like our own. So finally they admitted that a former missing link is just like you and I. Another good example is when they show the evolution, they show Australopithecus here, and then Pithecanthropus, and Neanderthal, and Cro-Magnon. Now this human, this Neanderthals now are recognized as human. Same here, but now this looks very human, but yet it's claimed to be an ape. When I looked at this, the first thing I thought was, this is not quite honest, because this is a picture of a baby, a small ape. When apes are just born, when they're a year or two old, they do look a lot like humans. And that's where they got this picture from. It's not a missing link, it's just a really young baby. And I have several pictures, but this illustrates it. So you can still see some of the ape traits, but on the other hand, less than a true ape. And this is a good example. You can see a very different structure, and this is a baby ape. Ears are large, but aside from that, they have very human features. Big eyes, okay, but in many ways, they look very human. So when they're proving evolution, they use a young baby, and that's not fair. And I recognize this because I've been doing a lot of reading in this area. Now, even in National Geographic, which is where this came from, we can see the difference between a baby and a chimp. And that's not why I'm using this picture. I'm using this picture because they point out here the DNA profiles of these two are nearly 99% the same. And this is also irresponsible. It's not 99% the same. It's more like 85% the same. We can do the comparisons. You can access the genomes of humans and chimps, and you can run what they call a blast analysis, and you can determine how close they are. And when you do that, we have information now that it's about 15% difference. 15% of 3 billion is about 450 million, almost a half a billion. So the difference is enormous genetically between us and apes. So how do they bridge that? They bridge that by mutations. So how do we get from an ape to a human? By mutations. And that is an interesting area because I spent a number of years working with mutations because cancer is caused by mutations, and that's what we worked with when I was at the medical school. So we know a lot about mutations. And here you can see diseases caused by mutations, cancer, as I mentioned. All inherited diseases are a result of mutations. Most birth defects are a result of mutations. The only other causes are pathogens, diet, and toxins, and accidents, I guess I could add. But by and large, most disease is caused by mutations. And that's well recognized in the medical community. Here is the Encyclopedia of Human Genetics and Disease, and they show all the many diseases caused by mutations. But mutations are supposed to be how apes changed into humans. And to highlight that, I quoted Ernst Mayr, who was one of the leading evolutionists of the last century, and he died at 99, and he said, quote, ultimately, all variation is due to mutation, period. And in case you don't accept that, Theodosius Dobzhansky said, mutation is the only source of the raw materials and hence of evolution. So all we have to do now is look at mutations. Does that bridge the gap? And Hermann Muller in the 1920s discovered X-rays increase the mutation rate in living organisms, in his case by fruit flies, by 100 times. So he reasoned you could drastically speed up evolution by causing mutations by X-rays. So you put the poor critters in a petri dish, put them in an X-ray machine, zap them, and look at the offspring. And you will find all kinds of interesting changes. And that's exactly what he did. And that was such an important discovery that this is an article from Scientific American. The headline says, "New discovery speeds up evolution." And this discovery was given a Nobel Prize. You can speed up evolution. And they were excited because now we have finally proved Darwinism. We now have unequivocal evidence because mutations, that is how we evolved, so you creationists can just shut up and go home. No question whatsoever. And this article brings out that this discovery was given a Nobel Prize, and Muller, for his Nobel lecture, wrote, "The accumulation of many rare, mainly tiny changes are the chief means of animal and plant improvement, but is how evolution has occurred by natural selection. Thus," I bolded this, it's not in the original, Thus, the Darwinian theory becomes implemented. So they had unequivocal proof, they felt, we now have proven evolution. There we go. We got the last step, because Darwin could not figure out how in the world the genetic variety originated. He couldn't explain that. How do we get the genetic differences? Well, now they finally got the answer. They proved Darwin correct. And to further highlight that, because I had some in the audience that said, well, I don't accept what you're saying. So I found in this book here, made it very simple, no mutation, no evolution. End of story. And then the next page said mutations are random, which is not true, but that's what they claim. They're random. And they admit beneficial mutations are rare. In fact, they are really, really rare, beneficial mutations. In fact, in my experience at the medical school, the word beneficial was never connected with mutation. Now, I'm not saying they're zero, they're impossible, but by and large, when you're talking about mutations, you're talking about a disease. And that's important in cancer research, because what we want to do is find the mutation that caused your cancer and treat your cancer according to the specific mutation which caused the problem. So that was very important. That's the leading. Cancer treatment relies heavily upon this. Now, this is a chart of the hotspots of P53, and this is P53 from colon cancer. And P53 is the guardian of the genome. And I'd love to do a PowerPoint on P53. P53 is, it's almost a human, it's almost a person. It checks out the DNA and says, there's an error there. We're not reproducing until that's fixed. So it directs repair of that mistake. If that mistake cannot be repaired, then P53 says we're destroying that cell. It triggers apoptosis, and the cell is destroyed. So rarely do mutations get by P53. The problem is when P53 is damaged, then we got a problem. And in almost half of all cancer cases, the cause is damage in P53, allowing the mutation to be expressed. Thus, we end up with cancer. Now, for P53, they found virtually all mutations are at this point here. This is the genome. We start here with 1. That's the first section, and 2 and 3 and so on. We go up to 389. So P53 has about 389 different parts. And 175 is a common hotspot, and 248 is a common hotspot, and 273 is a common hotspot, and you've got a couple more, less common, but we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that accounts for virtually all the mutations, period. So when you do analysis, sequence the genome, you end up finding more and more of the same. So the problem is, for evolution, they're not random. You don't get random changes throughout the whole system. You get the same hotspots that are damaged over and over and over. Saying that, you'll never get evolution. All you'll get is damage, and that's why in a medical community, when you talk about beneficial mutations, you get the look. Because we know, they know, beneficial mutations are not going to happen, or very rarely will happen. Now, X-rays. We know X-rays cause a problem, and if they really were beneficial, what you should do if you're a young lady and would like to have a family and you want to get pregnant, what you need to do next time you fly, after they put your luggage through the X-ray, say, could I go through that as well? Because I want to have a genius. I want to improve my child, that fetus, by causing some mutations. And my feeling is the TSA people would probably say, just a minute, madam, we'll be right back. And would come back with 2 men in white coats saying, now just relax, come with me, you'll be all right. And they would take her away because they would wonder what is wrong with her. And yet evolutionists really believe that that's how we got here, by the accumulation of mutations. It's not rational, really. The TSA people should take away the evolutionists who make these claims. It's not rational. You will never get you by the accumulation of mutations. It's not going to happen. It's not realistic. Now, besides mutations, what other explanation do they have for the origin of new genetic information? Well, none. That's it. And when you point this out to them, I don't really get much chance to do this, but occasionally when I do, the response is, well, it's like I've spent a lot of time testifying in court, and we have a saying, you have three responses. If you have the facts, you hammer on the facts. Some of you already probably recognize this. If you have the facts, you hammer on the facts. If you don't have the facts, you hammer on the witnesses. If you can't hammer on the witnesses, you hammer on the table. And that's, in my experience, what they do. I've been called all kinds of names. And when they do this, of course, I know that, they can't respond rationally. So, in fact, I've been called names I don't really understand what they mean. One was, I was called a loon. And I didn't know what it's a bird, but so what? So I had to ask some friends, and they said a loon is kind of a dumb bird, I guess. So that's what they were calling me, calling a loon, and that's why. So it's not rational. So it's frustrating when the Methodist Church and the other churches are dumping the Bible because they believe evolution has been fully proven, but it hasn't been proven. There's more evidence that I was beamed from Mars on the Earth than there is that evolution occurs, because we have clear evidence that evolution could not occur. Beaming me from Mars, you could say, well, wait a minute. We've checked the surface. There's no evidence of life. But we live inside. How do you get from Mars to the Earth? Well, we're teleported, and we're reassembled on the Earth. But you have a birth certificate. That's true, but that's a forgery. That was done by my Martian friends because they want me to get away with claiming that I'm a foreigner. So obviously it's ludicrous, but it's hard for you to prove that I'm not a Martian. Isn't it? And no matter what reason you give, I can come up with a counter reason. And the implications of this, which is another area that I focus on, and that is that we have in the textbooks created charts from lemurs, in this case, to Europeans. Lemurs, they believe, evolved into New World monkeys, then Old World monkeys, gibbons, siamangs, orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, negroes, negroids, australoids, mongoloids, and Europeans. And that's another area that I look at because I'm from Detroit, and I was raised among the black communities. And this is ludicrous. And we recognize today it is ludicrous, but yet if you collect old biology books, which I do, biology textbooks, you find that racism is blatantly taught in biology books and has been for decades. One more brief example is, this is from a textbook written by Ernst Haeckel, and we can now trace Darwin to Galton to Haeckel to Hitler. And I've done I have a book out there I did on Hitler. Clearly, Hitler's ideas came from this line. And if Hitler was a creationist and not an evolutionist, there wouldn't have been a World War II. Rejecting creation and accepting evolution is how they were able to support and cause World War II. So the implications of this are absolutely horrendous. And there's only a couple of slides I point out here, but the fact is that we know Darwin to Galton to Haeckel to Hitler. And if you read Hitler's works, you can see that he was very influenced by evolutionary ideas. Another picture here you can see illustrates the same thing, and I have hundreds of these, but I'll just show you a couple. There is the Caucasians, that's most of us. There's the Negroes, less evolved, and there's the gorillas. So this is evolution from gorilla to human. Now, obviously, I don't like to use the word, we don't like the word Negro. We don't like the word race either. Creationists prefer people groups, okay? But this is not a very accurate picture. You can see by the drawing, but that's what they try to explain in the textbooks that your grandparents studied of how evolution occurred. How common was this? In 1928, there were 375 U.S. colleges teaching eugenics. 70% of high school biology textbooks endorsed eugenics. And this is one example. I use this one. This was a Columbia University professor, and this book was published, I think, 1954. So as recent as that, you can see that racism was taught in our textbooks. Now, what have the courts ruled? The courts have said, and this is a quote, public school teachers must teach evolution as prescribed by the curriculum. And this overrides the First Amendment rights as a private citizen. And this is in the Webster versus New Lenox School District case. In other words, if I presented this PowerPoint in a school, technically I could be terminated. Technically, to present this PowerPoint in a public school would be in violation of the judges claimed the First Amendment. Okay? It would be wrong. It's a violation of the First Amendment. And how were our schools on this question? Well, I have a grandson that went to a Catholic school his whole career. He wants to go to Notre Dame, and so we went to Notre Dame, check out the school, and I went to the bookstore and checked out the books in the bookstore. And guess what? All the books about creation were opposed to creation and intelligent design. Not one book in the bookstore was supportive of either creation or intelligent design. And I know fully that, indeed, Notre Dame teaches evolution as fact. And I've talked to many people that went to Notre Dame or another Catholic school and lost their faith in attending a Christian school. How about Wheaton? Shouldn't be any problem there. They are, at least they were, an evangelical Christian school. Well, same thing. Nowadays, they teach evolution, tactfully, of course. They teach evolution as fact, and I know the creation group in this area has tried to reach them, and they basically said, we're not interested in your biblical myths of creation. We teach the fact of evolution. And I applied for a job there a few years ago, and thought, well, maybe they'll hire me because I had a good background, but wasn't an evolutionist, and a friend of mine gave me a strong recommendation, sent it to Wheaton, and guess what? They ended up hiring my friend and not me, which I guess doesn't surprise me, but I thought, gee, it'd be kind of nice to teach at Wheaton, but they made it very clear, we do not welcome you creationists to teach in our science department. And there's a film on evolution, 5 hours, I think, PBS film, and the last one is on religion, and guess what they focus on? Wheaton College. And they show that the professors at Wheaton College believe and teach evolution. Okay. Interestingly, I got this request for support, for money. They wanted money. And they said, quote, every developing mind wrestles with the mystery of how we became who we are. Before Darwin, the only sensible answer was that we were designed by a supernatural creator. Now we know that we evolved from more primitive life forms, but this complicated idea is not self-evident. It is hard to understand, and one must be taught by teachers who have the skills to do so. Well, they're saying that most teachers don't have these skills, but they have teachers that do, and they basically, this is called TIES, evolutionary science. These teachers who are trained to do this is up to the task to reach as many teachers as possible, so give them money, and then they can help teachers effectively teach evolution, because after all, it seems obvious that we were created, that we were designed, but we weren't. It's an illusion, and this institute helps teachers teach evolution in spite of the fact that it looks like we're designed. And Jerry Coyne, who teaches at the University of Chicago here, he basically shows in this book, Faith versus Fact, that it is irresponsible to meld creation and evolution. Science and religion are incompatible. And basically, you're fooling yourself if you think you can come up with a theistic evolutionary worldview. Good luck. Lipson here, he had a good quote. Evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted in, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit in with it. Very, very true, this professor stated. And it's acknowledged by Norm Geisler, who did an introduction for one of my books. Norm Geisler basically said, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. A literal Adam and Eve and creation erodes faith in evolution. It's a faith-based belief. And so it's a matter of, I have a faith, you're an evolutionist, you have a different faith. We both have faiths, but it's pretty clear to me that my worldview has more evidence than yours does. And this is a cartoon. As I mentioned, one common way evolutionists respond to us is by making fun of us. And in this case, there's the Pope. The Pope is throwing down science on these ignorant creationists and intelligent design supporters. And science, therefore, proves these two ideas wrong, and the Pope, therefore, is supportive of the evolutionary worldview. Eugenie Scott is famous for saying, we would rather have 2 ministers testify for us in court as opposed to 5 scientists. And unfortunately, there's many ministers out there that will testify in favor of the evolutionary worldview. And when I was involved in the atheist movement, we used to say these are useful idiots. Pastors who testify for evolution in court are digging their own grave, but they're useful idiots, and while we can, let's use them to help present our worldview. So why isn't this worldview more accepted? Well, the example I gave at the church I was at the other day was I've presented presentations at over 600 different churches. How many, I asked, are churches in Chicago? 20, 30, 40, 50? The answer is 1, the church I was at. Why in the world don't other churches invite me or others to present this evidence? Several churches, the response is it's controversial. I'd love to find some controversy with this. Hopefully you'll raise your hand and you'll say, wait a minute, I disagree with this. But that never happens. All I find is that people say, yeah, good presentation, but I have a question, and that's fine. This was an article in the Toledo Blade, which is the paper nearby me, which is Toledo, Ohio. And basically, these structures, the appendix, tailbone, goosebumps, how do we end up with largely useless body parts? And the article further says, we have all kinds of body parts that don't serve a purpose, or at least not a significant one that we know about. Well, that's an area, since I study human evolution, I have looked into in detail, and guess what? All of these structures have a very important function, every one of them. And I wrote a letter to the Blade, and I mentioned I wrote 2 books. Here's one, and this is in Arabic. A number of my books have been translated into Arabic, so if you can read Arabic, there you go, you can read this book. But in English, in fact, I think I'm out of these books now. I ran out. And I have a DVD on this. I do have plenty of the DVDs. By the way, if you buy any book, you get a free DVD, so I'd recommend that one. And I wrote to them and basically said, I've taught anatomy and physiology at the college level for 3 decades, and I've reviewed many A&P textbooks, and I have not seen a single one that even mentions the vestigial claim. All of them clearly point out that all of these structures they claim are vestigial are not. They're all useful. In fact, the appendix has 5 different functions. It is very useful. And as a result, they will not remove the appendix now unless there is a very good reason. So I wrote this in a letter, sent it to the editor of the Blade, and they called me up, so I know they got it. And I kind of expected they would never publish it, and they didn't. And this is my experience. Any information opposing the evolutionary worldview, good luck. They're not going to present it because they do not want to lead you in the direction of denying or questioning evolution. Court decision, Judge Jim Jones, defendant, this is his words, defendant makes a bedrock assumption which is utterly false. Evolutionary theory, this is the assumption they make, evolutionary theory is antithetical to a belief in the existence of God. The judge said that is simply not true, that creation in no way conflicts nor denies, evolution in no way conflicts nor denies the existence of a divine creator, period. So the court have ruled that theistic evolution, no problem. No problem. And the fact is, what you're doing is trading one religion for another. Religion is actually a worldview. It tells us where we came from, our purpose now, and where we're going. Christianity says where we come from, we were created by God, we descended from Adam and Eve. Our purpose in the here and now is to preach the good news and to witness for the kingdom and serve our Lord and serve the church, etc. Where are we going? Well, heaven or the other place. So both of these basically tell us where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. Evolution, same questions. It answers where we came from, apes, our purpose to survive, where we're going. When we die, and that's it. So in the schools, it's not that they don't teach religion, they teach their religion, which is right here. And so we talk about separation of church and state. You shouldn't teach religion in the schools. What they're saying is, you teach my religion. You're not going to teach your religion. And that is what's going on. Whole book about that. Michael Roos, nice guy. He wrote a whole book saying Darwinism is religion, and he shows us that indeed Darwinism is religion, except he doesn't do it in one sentence like I did. He does it in 350 pages, and so very detailed. I sat next to him on the bus when we were in California once and had a good talk with him. The main response that we get for these presentations is evolution. There you go, a fish, amphibian, primate here, like a primate here. This is, I don't know, this is a four-limbed animal. Human, modern human. And then we have de-evolution. Arizona Superintendent Douglas says teach creation in our schools, and you can see he's not a very bright person because obviously he doesn't know much about science because science has proven evolution. One more example, there's a scientific creationist here to apply for the position of biology teacher. This woman says, and there's the scientific creationist, kind of a simpleton, moron, apple, and a snake. Obviously, the only response they can do is to make fun of us. And like I say, if you have the facts, you hammer on the facts. If you don't have the facts, you hammer on the witness, the person. If you don't have either one, you hammer on the table. And here we go, hammering on the table. And one more, making fun of us. There, Billy wins his first creation science fair. Hypothesis, Darwin was wrong. Experiment, read the Bible. Result, God said it. End of story. And this is what's going on, except in fact, it's not creationists pushing creationism, it's evolutionists pushing evolution on the minds of kids, and the poor teachers are not able to stop the indoctrination in evolution. End of story. So, creation, I don't see it, I don't hear it, and I don't talk about it. Me no see, no hear, no talk. And so that is what's going on. Now again, you can look at evolution of other critters, and I've done a whole book called Fossil Forensics, which I indeed show that there's no evidence for the evolution of anything, but they claim the case for evolution is most complete with horses, whales, and humans. And the evidence for the evolution of horses, whales, and humans is all pathetic. So when they claim that's the best case, they recognize there's no evidence for evolution of these insects. So when they brag about the evidence for evolution, they look at horses, whales, or humans, and the evidence of those three is really pathetic. Just no evidence. I'd love to get into, we're trying to get into Taylor University. The president is a creationist, and he said, Bergman, you're welcome to come, but the biology faculty said, if he comes, we're not going to go and hear him. We don't want to hear any of this creationist junk. And this is a Christian school. Same thing with Wheaton. Now, the people from this group have tried to get into Wheaton without success. So they don't want to hear the other side. So the tragedy is, it's not only the secular schools that teach the evolutionary worldview, it is also the Christian schools as well. Exceptions, there's some exceptions. The one in Dayton is an exception. There's a couple in California. Liberty Baptist, of course, is the major exception. So there are a few schools that teach the other side, but you'll have to judge. What do you think? Is there a pathetic case for just not true? If it was true, then next time you go to your doctor's office, say, could you just do, I'm hoping to have a child in the near future, I'm trying to get pregnant. To make sure I have a really genius child, could I spend some time on your x-ray machine? I'm sure the doctor would say, madam, no, that's not a good idea, because you'll probably end up with a stillborn fetus or probably end up with a problem. You're not going to improve the child by spending time in an x-ray machine being exposed to x-radiation. It's not going to happen. And you all know it's not going to happen. So evolutionists, what is the source of new genetic variation? They don't have one. And without a source of new genetic variation, they have no theory. Okay? It's not there. So if I could get in, now the problem is, if I got into a public high school, since I don't work there, they can't fire me, but they may fire the teacher who invites me in. And we've had that happen. And several creationists who gave presentations in public schools, and they fired the teacher who allowed that person to come in. So you can see the hostility is absolutely enormous. But at least we should be able to give these presentations to churches.